I'm really glad to see such a large crowd here because of how important the topic is. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to introduce the ticks of medical consequence to humans, companion animals, and livestock here in Ohio, talk a little bit about the diseases that they transmit, a little bit about their habitat, maybe some about their seasonality. We're going to go in deeper on a couple of the different ticks, especially the deer tick and the new longhorn tick, which is causing problems with cattle and how we graze animals. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can keep yourselves tick safe and how you can keep your kiddos tick safe, which is really, really important. And then I want to save at least 15, 20 minutes so that I can address any questions you all might have. Okay, so let's get started. And I start with this slide. This is important to start with because the problems that we have with ticks in Ohio are fairly new, and the onset of those problems is really, really rapid. We've gone from one tick of medical importance to humans, companion animals, and livestock 20 years ago to 5 now. We've added 2 new ones in just the last few years, and the majority of the public health impact has actually occurred in about the last 5 or 6 years. But the speed of public health awareness has not necessarily matched the speed of tick impact in Ohio. So I grew up in Appalachia, and I rolled around in the woods, and I got ticks on me back in the day when I was a kid. They were gross, you pulled them off, but it wasn't a problem. It's different now. We have a huge public health problem from ticks, and so these are myths that I still hear as I go do this program around the state of Ohio. Myth number 1 is that ticks are only active in the summer. Actually, ticks are active the entirety of the year here in Ohio. We have positive cases of Lyme disease every single month. Myth number 2 is that ticks prefer the woods, and of the tick species I'm going to talk about, we do have a couple that would be considered primarily woods habitat ticks, but we do have a couple of ticks that can tolerate a little bit more open, a little bit more sunlight, and they're going to prefer more of that pasture, meadow, or hayfield. And then myth number 3 has been around for a while, and it's not necessarily what I would consider a myth. It is that it takes a tick a full day embedded in feeding on you before it can transmit disease to you. And at the time, this was true when it was talking about adult deer ticks vectoring Lyme disease to adult humans. But what we know now is it really has a lot more variables involved. And in the laboratory, we've been able to experimentally induce disease transmission in as little as 15 minutes of feeding. So if we want to drill down to the take-home point for tonight, it is this. Do not get bit by a tick for any reason for the rest of your life. That's all you got to do. And if you can do that, you're in good shape. All right, so here's the 5 ticks of medical consequence to humans, companion animals, and livestock in Ohio. And we're going to talk about each one of those to varying degrees. But I like to use this picture of a finger to drive home how ticks can negatively impact you. Okay, so regular sized human finger. Here's Lone Star ticks, male and female on the far right. Here's our 2 giants. Those are American dog ticks in the middle. And this is a set of deer ticks or blacklegged ticks. You got the male and a female, and look at that little dot. That little dot is a deer tick nymph. It is the size of a poppy seed. It is fully capable of transmitting any number of diseases to you or your animals, and you will never feel it, see it, or detect it on a tick check. That's what we're dealing with when we try to create the plan to keep ourselves tick safe. It can be challenging to do so. We're going to start with the American dog tick because this one's been around for a long time. This is the one that was impactful when I was in private practice because I practiced for 20 years. And when we think about the habitat, this is a more open habitat tick. This is your pasture, your meadow, your hayfield. Right now, you're as likely to encounter these just mowing your lawn grass because American dog tick adults have emerged over the winter and they're questing, looking for their blood meal. When we think about diseases, keep this in mind. Each tick doesn't transmit everything. They have sort of their favorites. And so for the American dog tick, it is known for transmitting Rocky Mountain spotted fever to people, and it would be the arthropod vector, one of them. Flies would be another one for anaplasmosis in cattle. So we've got good maps, and one of the things that I'm really liking is now we're starting to see some assets and research being put into tick research, and so we're starting to get better data, and then we can use that data to inform better tables and charts and maps that we can use to keep ourselves tick safe. So, state of Ohio is completely American dog tick habitat reported or established in all 88 counties. When we look at these maps, and you're going to see maps of the United States from the CDC frequently in the next 20, 30 minutes, this is sort of the eastern half line, and you can see that the American dog tick would be either reported or established in the entirety of the eastern half of the United States, and that's fairly common. But here's what I like to look at and just sort of see to point out what we're seeing in terms of ticks. They're very adaptive. They're moving into new habitats. They're establishing in places where we didn't think that they could do that. So when you look out here in the western half of the United States, this entire area would not be considered habitable for the American dog tick, but instead what we see is about 5 to 10 counties where not only has it been found, but it's established now. So we are seeing ticks expand their host ranges and going into new places. Okay, we're going to spend more than a few minutes on the blacklegged or the deer tick because this is public health enemy number one. This is the one that's responsible for the overwhelming majority of diseases transmitted by ticks to people. And when we talk about habitat for the blacklegged or the deer tick, this is a woods preferential tick. But when we think about woods, don't think that it's out in the country, because I come from an urban environment and we have a ton of deer in Franklin County. And those deer have very high prevalence rates for disease because we don't have a ton of square mile or acreage of forest. We might have these little parks or pocket forests, 4, 5, 6 acres around housing developments, and we have tremendous deer per square mile in those areas, and they have very high prevalence rates for disease that they carry. So a lot of these problems, when we look at the maps, you're going to see it's not urban, it's not rural, it is statewide, nationwide, global. So, woods preferential tick, when we think about the diseases it vectors, it's best known for Lyme disease, transmitted to humans, but also dogs, cats, and horses. And then it has a whole bunch of other diseases that it can transmit, Powassan virus, just some truly devastating things. That's the thing about the tick-transmitted diseases is they're universally horrible. They can cause lifelong problems. So when we think about Lyme disease, which is the #1 disease vectored by ticks, it causes initially problems with joints, and then it can cause problems with neurologic function and cardiac problems. And you can get a diagnosis, but if you don't get established on treatment early, some of that damage, if it occurs, even if you can clear the organism, could potentially be permanent damage. So there's the map. You can see here's our sort of line. It's pretty much a dividing line. This is generally thought of as too arid for ticks to live, but you can see that certain tick species are going in that area. You can see basically we have ticks from the north all the way to the south. Now this is a tick that really doesn't mind the cold at all. When I look at this map, you can see the entirety of New England is just lit up as tick habitat. Lyme disease is named after the town of Lyme, Connecticut. That's where we had first clusters of that. But not only can it take the cold, it can take the heat. Found all the way down to the Florida Keys. So we have new data sets that are driving really good outreach, especially from Ohio Department of Health. They're doing a tremendous job at putting all of this data together so we can use it. So when I look at this chart, and this is updated about 1.5 years, because the more data we get, then we can make more accurate tables and charts. Here is the phenology curve for tick life stages. Okay, so here is how they migrate through life stages. We have an egg and it hatches, and that's then a larval form, and it takes a blood meal and matures into a nymphal form. And then it takes another blood meal, matures into an adult form, and then the female takes a blood meal, and then she lays eggs. Okay? And when we think about how fast that goes, if we were to think about other arthropods of consequence like mosquitoes or fleas or something, they have very quick life cycles. A flea has a 30-day from egg to egg. That's all the longer it lasts. Ticks go, at least the deer tick, if it went through its life stage from egg to egg, that's a full 2 years. Ticks live a long time. They live as long as a hamster. So when you look at this curve, you would think if it was a true year, they would hatch and they'd go larval, nymphal, adult. But it doesn't go that way. It goes from nymphal, and then we have a peak of larvae and peak of adult, because this takes 2 years to complete. But remember, I showed you the picture of the little tiny black dot, the nymphal deer ticks that transmit disease in high amounts, very difficult to detect. Their spike is in the summer, okay? That corresponds to our Lyme disease by week. That is when we get the most cases in the summer, because we have the one that has high rates of disease present and is very difficult to detect. And as a result, we're getting high levels of cases. But take a look at this. When we think about ticks and we think it's a summer problem, take a look at when the adult deer tick is the most active. It is in the winter. Its highest period of activity starts in October and then runs into January. It doesn't mind the cold at all. I did a program in Noble County on Friday, and a client was there, and he had the rash. He had a tick on him. He pulled it off, and that was April. And here's a little spike we see right around now. That's probably some overwintered adults that didn't emerge until now. And so you'll notice it never goes to zero here, and it never goes to zero here. This is a year-round problem, okay? We might get a super cold snap, and that's going to decrease activity all the way down. But how often do we get those warm days in November, December, January, February, where ticks might emerge hungry, looking for a blood meal? So here is the map of where deer ticks are reported or established in Ohio, all 88 counties. Here is where we have 2025 cases last year compared to the normal incidence. So you can see this is a tremendous problem in the eastern and the southern parts of the state of Ohio. It is an unbelievable prevalence rate. Look at how many cases we see throughout this area here. And it's funny because it shows, well, you guys got lucky last year. There must not have been any Lyme disease at all in Pike County. But that's not the case. There was probably cases here, because remember, this is reported cases from positive test results. And what we find, at least I find when I go to, get back here. When I go to these places is, if you're in a county that has super high prevalence rates for deer ticks, we know that they have very, very high corresponding disease prevalence in the tick, meaning some of these counties, the ticks are 40 to 60% positive for disease. If you have a tick bit on you embedded in feeding for the length of time needed to transmit disease, you probably caught something. So a lot of the physicians that I talk to, they don't run a test or wait to see what happens. You're probably got something, so they're going to put you on something. And in fact, the client that I talked to in Noble County, he went on antibiotics walking right out of that doctor's office. They didn't do a test on it because he probably got something from that tick. All right, these are two of the most impactful tables that I have here, and I really want to have everybody focus on this, because on the left, that is Lyme disease by age and sex in Ohio. And you'll note that the two most commonly diagnosed cohorts by age in Ohio are our children aged 5 to 9 and 10 to 14. Our kiddos are getting Lyme disease more than anybody else because they're not practicing tick-safe behaviors and wearing permethrin-treated clothes and putting DEET on and thorough tick checks. Kiddos are walking tick drags when they go out into the woods, having fun in the summer, and they're getting Lyme disease as a result. And remember, if we don't have timely diagnosis and treatment on that, some of the damage caused by that might be permanent, that they would have to live their lives with. Everybody here, every parent, every grandparent, think of ways that you can start talking to your kiddos about practicing tick-safe behaviors so that they don't catch something that we could potentially prevent. And then this speaks to the speed of change. Okay, so we kind of have a sentinel event, meaning around 2010, we had our first diagnosis of deer ticks with Lyme disease. It was on a farm in Coshocton County. And so that sort of starts our clock, and you can see slow but steady linear increase until about 4 years ago, and then we just started going straight up. It stopped being linear, it went exponential. We have had, through 2024, a 48-fold increase in Lyme cases. And if you add 2025, it's another probably 55 or 60 times increase. But remember, that is cases that have been reported. CDC estimates that we're underreporting by a factor of 10. And so if we have 50,000 cases annually in the United States of Lyme disease, the true number by CDC estimates is closer to 500,000 cases per year. Okay, let's talk about the Lone Star tick, especially as it relates to Southern Ohio, because this tick is truly impacting people's lives here in Southern Ohio. The Lone Star tick is a woods preferential tick. It is a very aggressive feeder on everything. It does transmit disease to humans, companion animals, and livestock. Human ehrlichiosis is one of the ones that it can transmit. But where this is really, really impacting people in Southern Ohio is because there are some components of the saliva, a carbohydrate molecule in the saliva of this tick that is chemically similar to components in non-primate mammalian muscle. And if you get bit by this tick and your immune system reacts negatively to it, you can become allergic to non-primate mammalian muscle, which means you just became allergic to beef, pork, lamb, and venison, and the products we make from them, which might be dairy, or medications, or anesthetics, or your toothpaste, your chapstick, your lotion, your shampoo. That could result in a reaction of hives or vomiting or anaphylactic shock. There's been fatalities from this allergy, which is called alpha-gal or mammalian muscle allergy. And the biggest cluster of cases is in Southern Ohio. When we look at the map of distribution, you'll see it's pretty much all over the state. We see it all the way up to the lake. We see it all the way over to Cincinnati. We see Franklin County. You'll note that in every single map that I show you, Franklin County is positive for all of the ticks that we have in Ohio of medical consequence. Is that because we're super lucky? It is not. It's because we have a lot of tick researchers and we do a lot of tick surveillance and tick drags. And what that speaks to is not that Franklin County is some sort of tick magnet. It speaks more to the fact that if you really aggressively look for ticks, you will find them. And so when we look at a lot of these places, if we're not seeing them, it's not because they're not there with 100% certainty. It is maybe they need to be looked for a little bit harder. But when we overlay the alpha-gal map, what you see is this cluster right here. And I was wondering if Pike County Public Health is here and they had any alpha-gal numbers for Pike County or Scioto County. I know that we have cases in Pike and Scioto County. It would be the hot spot for down here. And I will be in Vinton County tomorrow night, and I will expect very similar things. This is changing people's lives. I did a program last year in Gallia County, and I had cattlemen report that a significant number of the cattle producers in Gallia County are allergic to beef. One producer said they had to wear a respirator to work with their animals. And so we do have a blood test for this, but it's not currently reportable in every state. And so we have to, they're thinking about potentially making this a reportable disease so we would have better data. All right, so now we're going to move to a little bit closer. So the Gulf Coast tick is a new tick to Ohio, but not a new tick to the United States. It's actually been studied since the 1800s. This tick had impacts to the cattle industry around the Gulf Coast, think Texas and Louisiana, where we graze a lot of cattle. This is a tick that prefers that open habitat. So now this is another one of those pasture meadow hayfield type ticks. And this is one that was associated with large wounds because it had giant feeding mouth part right there, and that was causing problems with cattle because they had the screwworm outbreaks back around the 1800s. A problem that, coincidentally, we are still addressing even right now. When we look at Ohio, we had seen it over the years, so like I said, new to Ohio, but not new. It had been moving its way up the Mississippi River watershed and the Ohio River watershed, and so now you can see that we have established populations around Cincinnati, and there is more research being done on it. A lot of these ticks, some of them are more of a consequential tick, so there's a little bit more aggressive surveillance on them, like for deer ticks and the one I'm going to talk about next. This one is starting to get looked at a little bit more. It can cause problems in people. Rickettsia parkeri would be considered a lighter version of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and then it can cause problems in dogs if they ingest it, and it can cause wounds on the ears in cattle because of that large feeding mouth part. And then you'll note we have them established in Franklin County because we're looking for ticks in Franklin County very aggressively. Okay, so tick number 5. In 2017 in New Jersey, on a farm, a farmer noticed that one of his animals had tremendous numbers of ticks on it. And that is unusual behavior for ticks in livestock. We've always had problems with ticks when we talk about animals, but it's not usually from infestation, it's from intermittent disease transfer, okay? But in this case, we had huge numbers of ticks on the animal, and so the farmer called the vet brought in the feds, and what they found was an outbreak of a true invasive tick from Asia, the Longhorned tick. And they have no idea how it got on that farm. It was in tremendous, tremendous numbers throughout the farm. They did an application of pesticide. They came back in the spring. It was still present. So this video was shot in 2018 in New York, next state over. And this is in the fall, and this is shot by a road crew. They left their truck on the side of the road and it was idling. It was hot out and they wanted to keep the AC on so they could jump in and out and cool down as they were working. And when they came back, they noticed something was crawling on their truck. Yeah.
Look at that.
Reddish,
Look at him.
muddy
Look
brown.
at the colony right there. Holy.
Yeah, it's...
Sean, you're probably careful touching that.
up here, I'm good.
That's insane.
The Longhorned tick, yes. Mm-hmm. All right, so that is what the Longhorned tick can do. That is what it can do to cattle. When we look at this tick, it has a few characteristics that we have to kind of keep in mind that make it a little bit different. One is that in its native range, it can transmit multiple pathogens. We're still figuring out what it can do here, because remember, they don't transmit everything, they have their favorites. It has a wide host range. It's been found on humans, all companion animals, all livestock, over 100 wildlife species, including migratory waterfowl. And what is really worrisome about this tick is its reproductive behavior. So other ticks would have male-female mating, but this tick doesn't need to do that. It is able to reproduce via parthenogenesis, which is where the female tick can just basically lay eggs, which means they're clonal. So she doesn't need to mate with a male. She can just reproduce herself in genetic clones. And in fact, in a lot of these cases, we're seeing just widespread clonal ticks in situations. We'll see this tick in huge numbers in pastures and huge numbers in animals. We'll see it in the millions in pastures and in the thousands on animals. There was the first tick found in Ohio in Gallia County in 2020. The second instance was found in Jackson County at our Jackson Research Farm. Gallia and Jackson are next to each other, so when we had our meeting for the tick vector disease working group here in Ohio, I suggested we head to Jackson because they were going to be running cattle through the chute in May. Sure enough, we did our little tick check on the animals as they were going through the chute, and we found one there. The third outbreak was in Monroe County in July of 2021, and it was associated with cattle mortality. There was 3 dead animals found in a pasture. That was 2 full-grown cows and their bull. And the tick drag, when they went down there, they did a tick drag, which is where they swipe the cloth through, and then you're trying to see if you get lucky that you might grab one. The very first tick drag, when they entered the farm, they found over 7,200 ticks on that initial swipe through the vegetation. So unfortunately, the working diagnosis was those ticks were killed from just overwhelming numbers of ticks present, just sucking their blood, basically. And this is something this tick can do. It can overwhelm animals. So here is, this is, if it's not up to date, it's up to date as of about a week ago because I was not able to attend last week's sit rep. But we have it in 28 counties here in Ohio, including Pike. And we had 18 at the end of 2025 and 28 at the, or 18 at the end of 2024, 28 at the end of 25. So we added 10 new counties. And so we're going to continue to bring tick specimens in, and we will populate this map as it goes. On the left is a screen capture from the last USDA sit rep. We now have this tick in over 25 states, basically half the United States. You can see we started in New Jersey up here, and then we've moved north and south and west. The worry that I have when I see these clusters out west would be that we're moving this tick and we're shipping animals to be fed out in there. And remember, it's a clonal tick. You need one tiny little brown muddy tick on an animal. Then you have a food source, and then you can move them somewhere and she can reproduce herself without the need to mate. Now this is kind of a wordy slide, but basically what we're trying to do is figure out what can this tick competently vector, because remember, they don't vector everything. So on the left, that is the list of us collecting ticks from the field and then checking them to see what they have in them that they fed on. That doesn't mean they're competent vectors. On the right is a list of diseases that we're trying to see if we can experimentally induce in the laboratory to see if they can transmit it. What we do know is this. It is able to competently vector a protozoal blood parasite, Theileria orientalis, the Akita variant, to cattle. Now, worrisome is there's an area over in Japan where the longhorn tick is the overwhelming most common tick, and they have corresponding very high numbers of that alpha-gal mammalian muscle allergy. So the worry would be this tick might be able to induce that allergy in people. And we have worries about that with other ticks. There was a journal article that came out last year where a human was bit by a deer tick and subsequently got the mammalian muscle allergy as well. And that would be truly devastating if deer ticks were able to induce that allergy in susceptible people as well. So, do we have any cattle producers in here? Okay, the next 5 minutes are all about you guys. And so, this obviously can change how we graze animals. This is something that can negatively impact cattle. Theileria orientalis is a blood, yes?
I've never seen the tick on a cow until today.
Till today. Yes, exactly. I'm going to show you a picture of that where the scouting is. So today, it must have saw the flyer. I don't even know what to tell you. But now you know. And it's April. This is a tick that normally we thought it liked heat more than the others just because of its native range. And so, you know, what it's doing, though, it seems to be adapting to Ohio because we're finding it earlier and earlier in the season and then persisting later and later. So now we've seen them as early as March and last as late as November, although they do seem to love that high heat in July. I will say this, just for you guys, I couldn't go too in deep with this, but there's some great research out of Rutgers on timing of caricide applications to pastures, which products work the best. So we'll talk in a minute about the integrated pest management strategies needed to control this tick, and spraying is not the answer any more than it is the answer for anything that we have anymore, but it is a tool in the toolbox, okay? So, Theileria orientalis, Akita variant, protozoal blood parasite of cattle. It's going to cause damage to blood cells. It is going to cause fever, inappetence, high heart rates, respiratory rates, but where it can really cause problems is it can cause mortality, open cows, stillbirth. There is no treatment. There is no vaccine. cattle have to recover on their own from this disease, and then they're persistent asymptomatic carriers for life. So I'm overlaying now the Thyleria map, which is not completely up to date because that's not reportable right now, although we are building a Thyleria map database now through our tick vector disease working group. But we're overlaying Thyleria with the green dots, and we're overlaying that with our positive cases for longhorn ticks. Okay, there's some correlation because the longhorn tick would be the arthropod vector that is going to transmit it to cattle. But I put this syringe there just to remind producers that a super competent, easy way for disease to go through animals is going to be on using the same needle as you go down the line. So it is very, very highly recommended for new needles every single injection in terms of biosecurity and disease transfer. Because needles basically mimic the piercing, sucking mouth parts of all of these arthropods that transmit disease. And so we didn't have as much of a problem here in Pike County as, say, when I was in Noble County on Friday, but I also put the map for EHD, which is epizootic hemorrhagic disease, which is a viral disease vectored by another arthropod, a culicoides, which is sort of like a biting fly or midge that causes a disease that tremendously negatively impacts deer, and we lost thousands and thousands of Ohio deer last year to this disease, but it is supposed to affect other ruminants, but the literature stated it shouldn't affect cattle tremendously. But unfortunately, what we had when we look at the places where it was super negatively impactful is that kind of mimics where we have the tick and the disease. And so we also have a fairly substantial percentage of Ohio cattle that are positive for anaplasmosis that they got when they were little, but they're resistant when they're little. But if they're immunocompromised adults, then they might break with anaplasmosis. So when we think about these diseases, you have a protozoa, a bacteria, and a virus. All of them are immunosuppressive, and they were all occurring at the same time. And then when we think about the other inputs to cattle in terms of their health, we think about nutrition being one. Last year's hay study done by Extension showed something like 98% of hay samples taken in the state of Ohio were not adequate in terms of maintaining good body condition for cattle. So now we have negative nutrition impacts and multiple diseases, and I had a very busy fall last year traveling to a lot of cattlemen's and veterinary meetings in the eastern and southeastern part of Ohio to address these concerns from my veterinary colleagues. Okay, scouting, you were right on it. You want to scout and find it early because remember, they can just breed into thousands and thousands and thousands, and ear margin and then tailhead perineum around the udder is the first place you'll see them, and then you would start to institute treatment or else they can just cover. Now, is anybody here from FSA? Excellent. Okay, so don't let him forget to talk about this because this is important as it relates to Thyleria and the livestock indemnity plan that FSA has. Thank you for being here. Okay, so how do we control this tick on pasture and animals? Just like most everything that we need to control, we need to think of the integrated pest management strategy that is needed to address this, using all the tools in your toolbox. There are products that are labeled for application on pasture. It says forage and rangeland that are labeled for ticks, but they have to touch the tick to work, okay? So if we have tall grass, it might not touch the tick. If we mow grass, we might not have that because they're under the residue mat. But there are studies that show that if you can hit them at the right time in terms of timing, you can knock them out of their life cycle as they roll through. And I can share those with Amanda so that she can share them out to the greater group. Then there's other studies out of Tennessee that show that a buffer strip right at that edge habitat between the fence line for pasture, if you can keep that low, this tick does not like short grass, that might inhibit a little bit of migration. Wildlife control is an important thing here because this tick will move on deer very effectively. The only thing they like as much as cattle are deer. And then we need to do more research on management intensive grazing. We have had ticks found at our Jackson Agricultural Research Station every single year, this tick, but we have not had huge numbers or cattle fatality. What they do is they frequently move their cattle, and their cattle keep the grass short for them. And so that might be a tool in our toolbox Fire, if we can manage with prescribed burning, has been a effective tick control for a long, long time. And then I am about a third of the way through a grant study down at our Jackson farm where we are actually taking this tick in sachets, live ticks in with data loggers for temperature and humidity, and we're putting them in windrows and we're baling them, and then we're unrolling the bales at timed intervals to see if the tick dies during the baling and forage making process, because say you have an infected pasture and you have lots of ticks in there, you don't want to have to remove the animals when you have that forage. And what we have found so far is promising, and we're only part way through the study, but the 2 unwrappings that we did of wet wrapped and net wrapped bales had 100% tick mortality. So that might be another tool in our toolbox. For application on animals, there are products that are labeled for ticks, and I know that cattle producers are not working their cattle every day, but you do have some intervals where you would potentially work with them that you might be thinking about doing fly control. Make sure that if you're going to do that, you're also picking products that are labeled for ticks, because not every product that's labeled for flies is going to get ticks. And if you're going to do something, use a product that's going to get them both. Okay? So far, so good on that. Then think about making sure in terms of your companion animals that you work with your vet to find the best product that fits in your budget, because dogs and cats, like kids, are walking tick drags. They're just outside vacuuming up ticks, and you want to make sure that they have something on them that is going to be effective that way. So far, we do have some pesticide options for killing ticks until we don't. Because remember, this is a clonal tick. So the first mama tick or grandmama tick that gets resistant to, say, permethrin, those genetics are going to be passed on to our babies and grandbabies forever. There's no males to mate with to reintroduce susceptible genetics. Now, could that be a weakness? If they're all genetically identical, then maybe we could identify something in their genome that we could target, because they're not going to adapt out of that. That would be where some of the research is going right now. Okay, now that we got y'all spooked and everybody's itching, let's talk about how we can keep the people safe. So, just like with your pasture and your animals, you have to come up with your own personal protective plan for safety. And there's lots of components. I like long pants. I like light colors. The key is get them off you before they embed and feed. Okay? So I could permethrin treat these. Sorry about that, Bradford. Permethrin treat these. Permethrin treat my shoes. Use a permethrin product if you're going to self-treat that's labeled for fabric, because there's lots of permethrins out there. It's been around for a long time. And then what I recommend, if you don't want to self-treat your clothes, pretty much every outfitter now sells permethrin treated clothes. You can find them in about any store. Permethrin bonds to fabric. It lasts through multiple washes, and it's a pretty effective armor. For your skin, you use a topical repellent, and there's lots out there. And you got to be a label reader, because they all have different actives and they all have different audiences and situations. But I'll share a link that leads you to the EPA's decision-making tool, so you can kind of plug through that to get the guidance you need on which one's going to work best for your situation. Okay? And then do a thorough tick check all the time. Meaning, I hike, I do pasture walks, I'm out in the field, I'm on farms. I am constantly looking at my legs to make sure that I knock them off as they walk before they can embed and feed. Then before I get in my vehicle, I do another thorough one. And then if I'm really worried, I get home, clothes in the washer dryer, I'm in the shower. Get them off you before they embed and feed. Yes?
How about sulfur powder?
How about sulfur powder? If it has a tick label, then I'm comfortable with it. But a lot of the products that are sort of reported that they may or may not work, I can't really endorse them unless I know that they're research, and then they have a label that is going to give you the guidance for any number of the species that you would use for that, simply because, you know, when we talk about pesticides, they should all come with a label that talks about the safe use of them, the safe disposal, and the PPE and things that you use. And so if there's products that have a label that I could take a look at for efficacy, then I could recommend it. But if not, I personally can't recommend it. All right, one of them gets past the goalie. You need to know how to get that tick off. There's one right way to do it, and then there's all of the other ways, okay? Tweezers are a pointy tick tool all the way down at the embedded head. Get it off, wash your hands, wash the spot, put it in a baggie, squirt some hand sanitizer in there if you have it, pretty good as an effective preservative. If you don't, then write the date, the time, location, where you found it, what it was on, and put that baggie in the freezer. You got a couple of options on what you can do. One option is we now have a Buckeye tick test at Ohio State University where for a fee you can send that tick into the lab where it will be identified, and they will run tests to see if it carried any of the diseases that the species is known to transmit. If you don't go that route, current guidance from ODH is take that tick in the baggie after the tick's dead to your county public health department. They may or may not be comfortable identifying it, okay? But what they've been asked to do is collect them county-wise so that we get data, and then that goes to Ohio Department of Health. That's going to populate our maps better. Okay, take-homes. What's the number one take-home? Don't get bit by a tick for any reason for the rest of your life, because they can cause problems. They can vector bacterial diseases, protozoal diseases, viral diseases, induce an allergy. We're seeing them expand the habitat. We're constantly learning new things about them. I change and update this PowerPoint every month. I did a presentation for Amanda. This is different. That was 2 weeks ago. Make sure that you have your personal plan for safety. Make sure that includes your animals, because they are walking biosecurity disasters in terms of tick preparation. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the right way to remove a tick, because research has shown if you take it off a different way, you could potentially increase your chances of disease. If you just grab it by its butt and try to yank it off, you're going to yank its butt off after you've squeezed the gut contents into you, because the head is embedded and cemented into you. And then you have options on what you do with it after. So that website on the left is to the Bite site that we maintain at Ohio State, and that has lots of great research and social media friendly videos, as well as the EPA decision-making tool. And I want to thank the United States Department of Agriculture, which funds my tick outreach and travel around the state so that I can do this. I'm at 41 counties and counting for tick presentations. On that note, I will take questions, and what we want to do so that it fits with the audio really well is raise your hand, and Amanda's going to come around so you can ask it in the microphone just so that it shows up good, and then I'll do my very best to answer them, and I'll leave this up here.
All right, we have a couple of questions.
Hi there, thanks for being here. Does a tick, if it's positive with a disease, will its offspring automatically be positive, or do they get it from attaching to a positive host?
So generally, when a tick picks up disease, it's because they fed on an infected host. So for like the deer tick, its larval form's preferred first feeding host would be the white-footed mouse in Ohio, which is very high for carrying Lyme disease. And deer carry Lyme disease, but they're not affected by Lyme disease. They're just sort of a reservoir for it out in the forest as well.
It's not a very smart question, but removing them from our cattle, remove them with tweezers like we do ourselves, and then save each of those ticks in a bag, or how am I supposed? I mean, I've been just smashing them and killing them, pulling with my fingers and making twins out of them. But so, how is the best way for us to remove them from the cattle? And there have been places where they have left a hole, and then I've been spraying those with whatever the medicine is on our cattle.
So, knowing that I have personally seen cattle with hundreds, if not thousands, of ticks on there, that's going to give you arthritis from just picking them off. You might want to even try like a flea comb or something that's going to take them off in large numbers. But quite honestly, if they're on there in tremendous numbers, get a product on there, because that means, there's an infestation, and mechanical removal can be helpful, but you also want to you want to get there before the numbers are so high that they can start causing anemia.
Just about every day, like it was out area. Right now we only have 8, we're down to just 8, and they're cats, so, but,
Yeah, April is not where you, yes, unfortunately, their reproductive behavior is such that the numbers can just be just tremendous.
Do they have cycles? I mean, like, there's more ticks this year than I've ever seen.
Oh, ticks in general, we have seen, and you saw that with our Lyme disease, they are increasing. What we're seeing is we're not seeing sort of that corresponding predator of ticks that would enter into that system, and you would think that if you had a food source that was out in the environment, that there would be some predator of that food source that would fill that niche because there would be a large amount of food. But we are seeing increased numbers of cases, and anecdotally, everybody says to me almost every year, this year is worse than last year. So I don't think I'm going to see that decrease in the short term.
Well, just a curiosity question. Say I found something, I haven't found any, of course I don't really look, but say I had a pump-up sprayer and I've done this with flies and stuff. With parathion, just go out and spray it. Did that take care of it?
So you would be required by federal law to, if you're going to spray for ticks, it has to have a label on it for ticks in whatever you're spraying it on. It's on that tiny little piece of paper that's folded up 5,000 times in there. And it's really tiny print, and we're pesticide educators in the state of Ohio, so we're bound to tell you that you are required by federal law to read, understand, and follow that little piece of paper in terms of what you're able to put that on. If it's labeled and you're following it according to that thing, then so far so good, yeah.
So as far as for the humans, do you know any idea of a time span? So if I'm out throughout the day, I'm not checking myself. If I start to get an itch, I've learned what that itch is, and it's usually a tick.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's from the saliva that's starting to do that, but once I get that itch, I know I've got one. So then I remove it then. So is there a time frame that you know of that when they attach, when that itch would start?
So I'm hesitating to give a time frame because it could be different for everybody in here, different for the tick species, and they attach at different things. But you said something that was very interesting to me, and that is most people don't report feeling a tick attach and feed, which is unusual because you feel a mosquito, and a mosquito's mouth part is way smaller than a tick. But ticks secrete a large amount of anesthetic to numb you before they put in a large feeding mouth part, but you don't feel that, but you do, the itch. So there is a certain subset of people and animals that have what's known as acquired tick hypersensitivity, where their immune system will actually recognize and fight off a tick through something like that. Now, I'm not saying anything about if you have that, but most people in here, I mean, if I don't feel a tick in bed and feed on me, and I'm out in tick habitat because they're very effective at numbing you and secreting large amounts. But it's interesting that you do feel that.
Do you have any idea if that could be affected by medication?
I have no idea. Yeah, and everybody's immune system in this room is completely different, and how you react to everything is completely different. So. Okay, all right, we might have this little Pike County focus group here. Interesting.
crawling on me.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. I'll feel the adults crawling. I don't feel the little ones crawling on me. Interesting.
So I've heard from treating pasture field yard, there's granules that can put down, but you were talking about for the longhorned, it has to touch the tick to be effective. Those granules that they are for ticks, are they like do they release over time? Are they actually effective?
So the products that would be applied, it would depend really on what the active ingredient in the product is and what its mechanism for action out there. I was referencing the products that I had done research on for pasture application. And most products are permethrin based, whether that is a permethrin or some synthetic pyrethroid like bifenthrin or lambda-cyhalothrin. And they do generally have to touch the tick to work. For really good information about managing ticks in the landscape, the best resource that is out there is actually from Connecticut Cooperative Extension, home of Lyme, Connecticut, and that was written by a friend and colleague of mine, Kirby Stafford, where he has a whole publication on how you can manage ticks in the landscape.
I have a question. I won't need a microphone. I think I figured that now. Where and why do we have thousands of ticks at this time? We grew up in this area, like you say, dog ticks. You went in the woods, your dog had a tick on, or you got a tick on. Where are these coming from?
So I get the question of why are we seeing the tick problem expand right now? And it's a fascinating subject if you go deep into it, because there's not one reason why. Oh, here's a simple explanation. There's actually tons of inputs that are driving that. We're reforesting from where a long time ago we had deforested for a lot of it. We have increased numbers of tick hosts like deer, and we don't hunt or have keystone predators like we used to do. There's some really fascinating research that talks about the transition for a lot of our Appalachian hardwood forests, where we're moving a lot from oaks into a lot of maple forests now. And maples are actually more conducive for tick survival because they shade the ground, provide more humidity on the ground, and their litter is a different quality of litter than an oak litter would be. So it's not one reason. There's lots of different contributing reasons in there, but they're all coming together to fuel this problem.